Hello, welcome to my presentation of Dominion Therapy and Education Center, or TEC, the analysis of the human resources and some suggestions for how we will move forward. The goals of this presentation are to examine the current capital resource management practices, evaluate some of these that we might need some revisement, and suggest some of those revisions for the 2019-2020 school year. Here are some of the current human resource management practices. So currently we are primarily focused on both the recruitment events at local college campuses and utilizing the company website. The director of Dominion ABA is the one who's primarily in charge of these responsibilities. But when we are taking people, we are usually using them in the entry-level positions, and the rates of attrition within this population is very high. So it's an as-needed basis primarily right now. Screening, we go with the industry standards where we have a health physical and a thorough background check because we work close proximity with minors and individuals with disabilities. So we want to make sure we're taking care of that. In the interviewing process, again, interviewees are usually seen by a panel of the school's lead clinician, an assistant clinician possibly, and a representative from the teaching faculty, especially if they're going to become a TA or a teacher's assistant. Initially, they might be interviewed by the clinical supervisor or clinical director if needed before brought into the panel. They last approximately 30 minutes, and they're also given a tour of the grounds following that. If we evaluate the ability to function effectively and professionally, we are usually doing that in that interview. We could probably improve on that, though. The current attrition rates occurring in entry-level positions are pretty high for especially the teacher assistant and the behavior technician roles. And this is not an unusual statistic in this field. And it is strained more by the need for qualified candidates because the responsibilities of these entry-level positions are pretty high. The induction period is when we have these newly hired employees or given them placements, and we try to keep it in line with what they would desire to be working in so we can keep them interested in what they want to do, and also based on what their performances are across the different skills that will be needed. Two exercises that we have introduced recently have been the incentive program for completing the RBT certification and maintaining it over time, and the new employee bingo program, in which new employees will follow step-by-step instructions for learning some things about the new program, the new school setting. They'll learn about different ways of interacting with their email and internet basis and their expectations of the job. As far as coaching and ongoing training, there's no formal program in place. They do have an opportunity to get field training on an incidental basis because of the close proximity with the paraprofessionals, such as the teachers and expert roles, and some of the paraprofessionals, such as the RBTs that are already existing. So as far as review and performance management procedures, due to the light staff and the high turnover, there has not been a lot of review of individual goals, and we are not frequently conducting that for either the entry level or the licensed or experienced staff members. So there's not really any review of goals or expectations on an ongoing basis. The field of ABA and education have a lot of opportunities to grow, and Dominion also provides some supplemental stuff for that as well. So many opportunities for career mobility within the company and the field includes something like the registered behavior technician credential, which is often encouraged and incentivized, as we have mentioned before. Dominion itself, as a company, has other programs underneath its umbrella, including in-home ABA. There's a school setting. There's a one-to-one setting. And the variety of other provider services. And they're offered more frequently to those with more experienced employees. So some of the newer hires may not be able to access this resource of being able to move sideways. So here's some of the reviews of the data that was evaluated here. So we have a pretty nice distribution across the two races that are represented, where it's approximately 50-50 with a heavier weight on the Black population within the school, which is great, especially when we look at, there's a nice staggered measure of different degrees we have. So we have quite a representation of educated and highly qualified staff members. But it becomes problematic when we get to dividing that by race, which could be incidental, but should be looked at on an ongoing basis, because we have a lot of white individuals who are holding supervisory or teaching roles and not over here with the Black individuals. Now, the number is still pretty low, but as we grow, we need to keep an eye on that. So the analysis of employment needs, this is some of the data accrued from the 6 months that the school's been open. So this attrition rate right here is going up at the same rate as the student body growth, which is problematic. Number of students right now is at 20. It has gone steadily up. And the approximate number of open positions has decreased because we've had a slight increase in our employees since December. But it's still not quite where it needs to be, where we have this gap right here that needs to be filled so that we are meeting a near one-to-one ratio with the students with the high rates of behaviors and restrictive skill sets. Our hiring has steadily increased, but again, this is not quite at the rate that we need it to occur, especially for that attrition rate being so consistently up. So here are the identified and targeted components. We got a shortage of availability in specialized fields. We have a higher standard for admission and must evaluate candidates on that. So we have that very intense screening process, and we also have a very complicated manner in which we perform our services for the kids. We're further limited by recruitment modalities. As far as website interactions, they're rather challenging, and they're kind of based on chance if someone were to come to our website, and that's mostly going to be customers. We have irregular career events, so we'll be accessing them in the spring and in the fall, but that doesn't necessarily make it available for us to be able to get that on-the-fly position filled. And these things are limited in their access to a lot of the diverse populations that we could be pulling from. So the screening and interview process is limited by the narrowness and the range of candidates that we talked about here, due to the recruitment being narrow, and the placement procedures don't align with evaluations because there's so much more emphasis on filling a position to relieve the pressure on the other staff. And we try to meet these industry codes and student ratios also to make sure that we're in compliance, but that doesn't allow us for moving teachers where we would like to place them. So as far as induction, I believe that we should look at the induction of brief introductions in the workplace, little ongoing programs to assist new employees, and existing faculty bear more of the workload. Attrition rates are also very high. So while we have the RBT induction process and the routes to licensure, there's not really an emphasis on it because of that incentivized program. The routes to licensure are going to be primarily the individuals scientific routes and their school routes on their own personal goals. There's not a lot of support there from the school. And the supervision for those is rather light, though it's required if we sign contracts. So it becomes more of an aversive thing, which is made to maintain some retention, but in the long run, a lot of those are not upheld. So we talked about our cultural and ethnic diversity distribution and how it had a pretty nice 50-50 rate as far as the distribution of the individuals. But then when it gets down into the way that the skilled versus entry-level positions were distributed did not necessarily represent the African American or Black community in a leadership role, which will potentially become problematic if our leadership roles and the long-term employees aren't well-rounded or diverse. So some of the recommendations for these to be addressed. So new employees have a statistically higher likelihood for attrition in the early stages of the career. I'm not sure why that cut off there. The candidate retention certifications or licensure should be really emphasized, such as the RBT, and making sure that we're giving support in getting that, and also getting potentially the teaching licenses provisionally or otherwise. And they should feel supported by our colleagues and made feel a part of the school. So when we create these groups, we'll have a little bit better candidate retention, especially when we're finding ways to give them that support in an organized and consistent manner, financial support for academic goals, personal goals. And the literature suggests a really good solution for this would be a special education mentor provided for emotional and practical scaffolding to help us with planning strategies for new employees, paperwork and time management for new employees, response to behaviors and disabilities, and some strategies for helping them resolve some of the issues that can come up. And when we do this with someone who's very skilled, we'll find that our tasks will be developed, the skills will be developed by the individuals in the way that the company would like them to do. So for example, if I'm training someone how to bill for the services we provide as their senior staff member that's providing them the special education mentor, I can actually help them to do it the way that the administrators want to do it, rather than them trying to learn from their peers or learn on the fly. Additionally, guiding new hires towards familiarity with procedures, then to proficiency, and then to actually serving as mentors themselves would be a great way for us to address a lot of the onboarding and retention, and also create the community support that we were talking about earlier. Some of the steps that I think should move, and in the order I think they should move in, is to immediately fill the remaining vacancies. So we've already met that level of stress on the staff members right at the beginning. Then we should use some tools to assess the human resource needs, such as figuring out which positions are going to be the highest need and the fastest time. And we should diversify the methodology for recruitment to outside of just using the website passively and going to intermittent opportunities for career fairs. Something like going to a school more often, colleges more often, setting up some partnerships, setting up some opportunities for internships, setting up some opportunities for working in the nonprofit or working in the fundraising positions, and kind of creating a little bit more of a buzz around the company. Applications should be simplified if they're going to be accessible just online, or they should be guided through them in person so that the application process is not going to be our main screening procedure. It should be that the interview and the actual screening of the individuals will serve as a measure. So when we're trying to maintain our retention, we should do it by establishing, supporting, and evaluating sustainable goals. So if we have the data tracking procedures and programs of finding out what their goals are and then finding out ways that we're going to measure them on an ongoing basis, we should have these monthly and quarterly meetings at the least to be able to assess whether or not the individual is helping or is maintaining progress towards achieving goals. So these goals should be achievable, and this team-based approach would be the best way to do it, where you have the mentor, the supervisor, and the individual all working together to plan towards making these goals and fade these out to be more of a self-maintenance position, because by the time they are no longer with their mentor formally, they will be a mentor themselves and will need to have some skills in self-maintaining their progress towards goals. One of the really good ways we can find for defining this teacher quality would be this teacher assess and breakthrough and change measure. And with that, you can find ways to measure the change over time. So our responsibility should ultimately shift from the mentor and supervisor to the employee in this registered behavior certification program, because you've got the opportunity for leading them to the certification, but this will assist in making it because they'll have to have their supervisions, they'll have to have their ongoing continued education. It will allow for a little bit more of that fading to self-maintenance to occur. And in the long-term retention and eventually professional development department, we have the opportunity for this program to really support professionals and paraprofessionals going in an ongoing stepped up basis, all the way up to potentially being an opportunity for this to be a entry into a school if we get a partnership with someone like VCU. And so as far as maintaining that diverse employment that we talked about should be a goal earlier, and the career development. So if we are using a resource like the Urban Schools Human Capital Resource Academy's recruitment and selection strategy form, it will address any future shortages of diverse teachers in critical areas and identifies these shortages before they become problematic or ingrained, as we said about our data. Or we could use something like the Dimensions of Culture questionnaire found in Peter Northhouse's 2016 publication, where it can help identify the culture dynamics and determine gaps which should be targeted. So if you have too much of an attitude towards certain racial distributions, or if you have too much of an opportunity to essentially target those. And it can also be used to select and groom potential leadership candidates based on the skills and the qualities of their leadership styles, which it also addresses. I want to thank you. Thank you for coming and listening to my presentation. I hope that if you need anything, you will reach out and I can clarify any questions you have. Have a great evening.